The year is 1994. The comic book industry is crumbling, but stubbornness from a certain company would lead to the revival of one of today's most powerful industries, Marvel Comics. It all began as an idea called Project X. Join us in this mini-series as we look back at the history of Marvel in the theme park industry and discuss where the franchise is going across the world's largest theme parks, Disney parks and Universal Studios. In today's video, we'll look at the incredible and crazy journey of how Marvel first landed in Universal Studios Orlando. Soon after Universal Studios Orlando opened in 1990, Universal's park executives met together to discuss their desire to open a second theme park and a slew of hotels in Orlando, Florida, tapping their new park as the most popular park of the two. Their hope was to flip Universal Studios from a one-day local excursion to a multi-day tourist destination. In order to compete with Disney World, Universal Studios turned to Warner Brothers to establish a partnership and bring Warner Brothers cartoon characters to life in their parks.
Say your prayers, varmint!
Oh, read it.
Yeah!
Originally slated to be named Cartoon World,
I'm a cartoon.
Project X would see designers creating epic concept art for lands, or islands as Universal was calling them, from Looney Tunes, Jurassic Park, Dr. Seuss, classic cartoons, and finally, DC Comics. We'll discuss the other lands in later videos, so make sure to subscribe and click that bell to stay updated. Universal's designers were hard at work creating concept art for Warner Brothers executives. The superhero-themed land was to be split into two areas, one themed as Metropolis, the other as Gotham City. These two areas would showcase two sides of the DC Comics, the positive, uplifting Metropolis with Superman, and the gritty and dark Gotham with Batman.
Bruce Wayne. You peaked.
Guests would be able to board a 3D simulator ride in Metropolis that would take riders through an epic adventure pitted against Superman's nemesis, Lex Luthor. They would enter through the headquarters of the Daily Planet, board a news helicopter and fly alongside Superman in his bid to protect Metropolis. Meanwhile in Gotham, on the other side of the DC land, a number of rides were projected, featuring Batman and several of the villains from throughout the comic series. Ideas range from a Gotham City Opera House 3D show, to a Batman and Robin themed stunt show, and even a Joker themed ride. The Joker Madhouse, as it was to be known, would feature the merging of a Wild Mouse style coaster and a dark ride that would bring drops, twists, and turns sure to scare and entertain its guests. But perhaps the most exciting and anticipated ride design was a Batman and Penguin themed dual track coaster. Batman Returns, which was released in 1992, saw the revival of Penguin, the popular DC villain. As guests entered the ride queues, they would either choose to ride on Batman's Batwing flyer or Penguin's Penguin. The guests would take off from either the Batcave or Penguin's lair. The intertwining tracks would travel through 3 showrooms and mimic battles between Batman and his adversaries, eventually leading to a victory for Batman. But soon, these elaborate plans would come to a screeching halt, as the process Universal faced to come to an agreement with Warner Brothers was a bit like Captain America and Tony Stark coming to an agreement in Civil War. It just wasn't going to happen. The dispute stood over a royalty fee that Warner Brothers would receive for their intellectual properties housed in the parks. Universal had offered a 6% royalty, while Warner Brothers wanted 10%. After the success of the 1989 Batman movie starring Michael Keaton, Warner Brothers thought that they had the upper hand. But as negotiations continued and Universal refused to budge, Warner Brothers countered with an 8% royalty deal. Universal still wasn't happy. And finally, in a fit of anger and frustration over Warner Brothers' stubbornness, Universal's executives rang Warner Brothers and called it quits. Universal needed to regroup and rethink Cartoon World. Without Looney Tunes in DC, the designers and engineers turned towards the adventures of the storybooks. They refocused on their efforts to house Dr. Seuss in the park.
It's like a ride in an amusement park!
You mean like at Universal Studios? Cha-ching.
Hired several former Disney Imagineers to bring the world of ancient legends to life. They looked back again at classic cartoons such as Popeyes and sought the right to another comic book franchise, Marvel. During the 90s, while many entertainment industries were booming, the comic industry was in turn facing collapse.
Well, the 60s were fun, but now I'm paying for it.
With the dawn of new writers, comic book companies, and an oversaturated market, valuation on comics went down, and interest began to fall in favor of the grittier stories of graphic novels. In the wake of their DC intellectual property loss, Universal approached Marvel, and in 1994, the fallen comic book company quickly accepted their offer. The contract between these two companies, which we will discuss in a later video, would later prove to be one of the most important and messy theme park contracts as Marvel rose to fame with Kevin Feige's Marvel Cinematic Universe, also known as the MCU. By 1996, Marvel had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. After a series of legal fights, they would be purchased from the bank by an Israeli toy company, Toy Biz, and under the wing of Toy Biz, Marvel Enterprises was created. While Universal Studios pushed onward for a 1999 opening of Islands of Adventure and Superhero Island, Marvel Enterprises was rebranding and discovering a new market in the wake of the comic book crash. Following the footsteps of DC's Batman movie series, Sony would acquire the rights to Spider-Man in 1998 and begin the process of creating the beloved Spider-Man series from the early 2000s starring Tobey Maguire. Marvel Enterprises, alongside Paramount Pictures, took a unique approach to deciding the focus on the next big superhero hit. Subscribe and stay tuned for our future videos as we discuss the assembly of our favorite on-screen heroes, the Avengers.
Avengers! Assemble.
Universal Studios wasted no time in designing their Marvel-themed land, hiring a number of creators and artists to establish a vision. Borrowing ideas from their previous DC-themed land, they established Superhero Island. Universal's designers would choose the three most iconic teams from the Marvel franchise to focus their designs: the Avengers, Fantastic Four, and the X-Men, with rides featuring Hulk, Doctor Doom, Storm, and Spider-Man. The land, ripped straight from the comic universe, would eventually house arguably one of the best rides in the theme park industry, The Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man. In our next episode, we'll discuss the vision, development, final attractions, opening, and eventual success of Marvel's Superhero Island. Make sure to subscribe below and click the bell for updates.